On this episode of China Unscripted, an Australian student stands up to the Chinese Communist Party, and his university threatens to expel him. Turns out they get a lot of money from China. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
Joining us today is Drew Pavlou, a 20-year-old student at the University of Queensland, Australia. He's organized several demonstrations in support of Hong Kong protesters and criticized the Chinese regime's oppression of ethnic Uighurs and Tibetans. And he now faces being expelled from his university for that behavior. Thanks for joining us, Drew.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So first question, why do you hate China so much? Did a Chinese girl break your heart, or are you just jealous of China's rise?
Look, Chinese state media has, labeled me an enemy of China and labeled me anti-China, and that's Chinese Communist Party propaganda.
Well, congratulations, firstly.
Yeah, thank you very much. But it's Chinese Communist Party propaganda. It's something that they always try and, level at critics of the regime, because they conflate the party and the Chinese people. I'm not, I'm not opposed to China. I'm opposed to the Chinese Communist Party. So, to be opposed to the Chinese Communist Party is to be pro-China. I believe, the Chinese people are born with equal rights, equal dignity to myself, to every other human being. That's why I care about supporting Chinese human rights. That's why I support the rights of these people as they are, trampled by the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not anti-China, I'm opposed to the regime due to its human rights abuses. And, I make a distinction between the party and the people, which the Chinese state, hates. They like to pretend that all criticism of the party state is criticism of the Chinese people. And it's inherently, this racist, anti-China, xenophobic thing. But I believe fundamentally, Chinese people possess the same rights, value, dignity as myself, all other human beings. That's why I fight against this Chinese government. That's why I support their human rights.
I think that's very well said. But okay, so seriously now, your story is absolutely incredible. It's insane what's happened to you. Why don't you give us a rundown for people who don't know your story? How you got to where you are now?
Sure. So I was never really, I guess, a big. I was never really a person big time into activism. I guess the events in Hong Kong, the increasing persecution, oppression of the Uighur people, the Tibetan people, really, woke a fire in me. I felt like there were these searing injustices, and I felt sickened, that the political business establishment here in Australia, but also around the world, tried to look the other way while these human rights abuses were being perpetrated. And so, I've always had this side to me where I see a hornet's nest, I want to kick it. And I hated that, the elite, the political establishment were all quiet in the face of these terrible, terrible human rights abuses. I hated that my university developed really close ties with this regime while this regime persecuted people on a tremendous, morally catastrophic scale. So I felt like something had to be done, and I organized a protest in July last year at UQ. And it was organized for Market Day, which is, I guess, traditionally the busiest day on campus. And we chose that for a reason, to make sure that our voices would be heard. We sat down in the busiest walkway on campus on the busiest day of the year, a peaceful sit-in, opposing our university's close ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Because we're talking our university relying on the Chinese Communist Party for, business ties that are worth billions of dollars over the long term. Our university, relies on hundreds of millions of dollars in student fees from China each year. And because the Chinese Communist Party is a totalitarian regime and it can decide to turn off the taps at any moment, it can decide this campus is too politically sensitive to allow Chinese students to study on. They could, tomorrow overnight, bankrupt the University of Queensland, bankrupt many students in Australia. I mean, bankrupt many universities in Australia. So yes, our university has these very close ties to the Chinese government because they know they need to cultivate these ties to ensure the Chinese government doesn't turn off those taps. we sat down, we organized this peaceful protest criticizing these links with, like, you know, a government that I believe is committing genocide, you know, 1.5 million Uighur Muslims in concentration camps. We had a peaceful sit-in, and, you know, supporters of the Chinese government surrounded us, assaulted us. I was assaulted several times on the day. I was, you know, punched in the back of the head while my back was turned, thrown to the ground.
Yeah, there were like about 200 pro-Beijing counter-protesters that showed up that day, right?
The police actually ultimately estimated that the numbers on the pro-China nationalist side were about 500 to 600 by the end of the day. It developed into, you know, a standoff. Hong Kong students were choke slammed, thrown to the ground. A security officer was bitten. Other Hong Kong students were literally bitten. We faced really extreme violence, like, by supporters of the Chinese government. It was an attempt to, you know, silence people through thuggery and intimidation. And the consulate the next day put out a statement, you know, endorsing the patriotic behavior of the Chinese nationalist supporters who opposed us. What was patriotic, you know, about, like, assaulting people for sitting down, peacefully protesting? It was a peaceful sit-in. The Consul General, Zhu Ji, he denounced, you know, this protest as organized by a small group of separatists, in his words, with ulterior motives. What's significant about that? Well, I was named in Global Times, Chinese state media, the day before as the organizer of this protest. So Zhu Ji was calling me a separatist. And, you know, separatism is a capital offense in China. It carries the death penalty. And what happened when he labeled me a separatist? You know, I received hundreds, like an uncountable number of, like, you know, abusive messages sent to me across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, dozens of death threats to, you know, murder my family, torture them in front of me while I looked, you know, rape and kill my mother in front of me, then torture and kill me, we'll find your house, we'll kill you. I've faced, you know, these really sick, vulgar, vicious, like, you know, abusive messages after the Consul General denounced me as a separatist and as a hater of the Chinese nation. And then, you know, it wasn't, you know, UQ's prerogative to stand with me, because they had actually recently announced the Consul General, Zhu Ji, as an honorary professor at the university.
What?
This was an honorary professor at the university, you know, endorsing violent attacks on students for peacefully protesting.
Wait, hold on. So what did the university do to like protect the students and protect you after all of this happened? Like, you guys were physically assaulted and you got death threats.
Yes.
What did the university do?
Nothing. The university did nothing to protect us, you know. So, in fact, like, there were attempts to, you know, So I organized, you know, a follow-up rally for a week later to try and denounce the violence, basically signal our resolve to continue protesting peacefully on campus and not let, like, this sort of thuggery and intimidation win. And what was the response of the university? Behind closed doors, the university officials were telling, you know, the leaders of the student union, you have to stop Drew Pavlou's next protest. You have to talk to Drew and stop him. When it became clear, you know, that they weren't going to be able to stop us, I was called into a disciplinary meeting, which was conveniently set by the university the exact day at the exact same time that we had publicly listed this rally. And this disciplinary meeting was ostensibly for unrelated matters, you know, but conveniently the exact same time and date that we had organized this rally. When I told them basically, I'm not going to the disciplinary meeting, I'm holding this peaceful rally, they then called me into a security meeting along with the other organizers of the protest. And they basically gave us a list of conditions under which they would allow us to hold the protest, or they reserved the right to tell police to like, you know, get police to, like, haul us off campus and, you know, disperse the protest with force. Like, this is CCP sort of stuff, right? You know, violently dispersing protesters if they don't comply with conditions or whatever. This was UQ's, you know, demand. And one of the demands was that we hold the rally, you know, far from the spiritual heart of the university, which is our great core and which is where the violence on the first day, you know, happened. They wanted us to hold it on a patchy grass area behind this really tall security fencing on a, like, in a completely, like, isolated part of the university behind a car park. That's where they wanted us to hold this, you know, rally, behind security fencing on a grassed area behind a car park. It was an attempt to, you know, like, just make sure there was zero oxygen for this rally. And then they were like, and then they gave me one of those sort of Godfather Mafia style threats. We like you being a student at the university. We want that to continue into the future. that was their, they were tying my enrollment to like following these stated conditions.
That was after just one protest that you guys had organized.
Yes, and that was the first time, UQ threatened my enrollment. So that was July 29th, 2019.
Wait, so for that rally that you were talking about, did you end up holding it in the spiritual heart or did you move it like they wanted?
Of course we didn't move it. We held it in the spiritual heart of the university on the Great Court, which is the very center of the university. We just said, with your security fencing, like, we're not going to be in the cuck pen, we called it. They said it was a free speech designated area. We said, we're not going to the cuck pen.
So your university started threatening your enrollment. And how did they do this? Because obviously they can't just be like, we don't want you to have free speech. If you keep speaking your mind, we're going to expel you. What excuse did they give? And how did this escalate over the time?
Well, I guess it developed like there were even more of these, threats, so like, I guess I requested to speak with the vice chancellor. They refused to let me speak with the vice chancellor. So I thought, one way I can speak with the vice chancellor is if I get elected to the board that governs the university, the UQ Senate. And so, I ran a campaign. Students elected me to the UQ Senate so that I would sit right at the table with Peter Hoy and the vice chancellor that had threatened my enrollment,
Oh, so it sounds like students at the university really liked what you were doing.
Yeah, of course. Students backed us. We won a landslide election. But that was, really like the university, pulled out all stops to try and like stop me from winning that election. So they literally, recruited a candidate who ultimately ran a pro-CCP sort of online campaign, like a Chinese social media campaign saying, vote for me to stop Drew's Hong Kong protests. He's like anti-China. So basically trying to harvest the votes of like Chinese international students to oppose me.
Do you know the percentage of Chinese international students at University of Queensland?
Well, there are 9,000 students at UQ from mainland China. And
wow.
That's worth like about probably $300 million to the university every year. So billions over the long term.
Holy cow. Well, how many students are there overall at University of Queensland?
52,000-ish, I think.
Wow.
Before the pandemic.
So that's like 18% or something?
Okay.
Right.
So not enough to swing an election, but I could see how that could become a serious problem for democracy on campus.
It became a serious problem for me because what happened when this Chinese social media campaign went viral, this Chinese social media campaign saying, like, vote for me to stop Drew. He's like anti-China and stuff. Well, I was, actually assaulted while I was campaigning on campus. I was like handing out flyers near the bus stop one day and, I guess a Chinese international student came over to me, like sort of grabbed me, like yelled, you anti-China to like my face and like tried to push me to the ground. Like that was sort of what I actually faced. And there was an uptick in death threats and stuff like that. And when I was ultimately elected, they tore down the Lenin Wall the day I was elected. The Hong Kong students had erected this huge Lenin Wall on campus. And the day I was elected, I guess supporters of the Chinese government ripped down the Lenin Wall and then put up in its place just one single photo of me and like saying, don't insult Chinese and insulting me in Mandarin.
And did the university do anything after that?
No, UQ did nothing, and then my first act as, elected sort of UQ senator, I put out a statement saying like, as a UQ senator, like speaking for the university that elected me just then, I stand with Hong Kong. I'm worried about the police brutality there. I support their struggle for freedom and justice and democracy. And then UQ, emailed me threatening again, like my place on the Senate and threatening my continued, status as a student unless I deleted those posts basically saying as a UQ senator, I support Hong Kong. In February, I was ultimately seated, and then in February, the first Senate meeting, they spent the first 3 hours, and these Senate meetings are supposed to be like deciding how the university is run, and they spent the first 3 hours of the first Senate meeting of the year discussing whether they would remove me. I was democratically elected by students, and like this was, the first Senate meeting of the year, and they were discussing like removing me and replacing me with the runner-up who was, the pro-China candidate.
How many students are on this Senate?
I was the one elected undergraduate student.
Okay. So essentially, they wanted to remove the one person that was elected by the entire undergraduate class because of your political statements.
Yes, and I was elected, in the highest Senate turnout election, like in UQ history, with like the largest vote total ever, and they were trying to remove me in the very first meeting of the very first year. The very first meeting of the year.
And why did they say you needed to be removed?
So this comes into, I guess, some of like the allegations in the expulsion dossier I eventually received. I guess they didn't want to meet with me, and they were basically just like, they didn't want to speak. They didn't want to sit down. I was absolutely sick of the status quo. So I thought, okay, what sort of like recourse do we have when like we've got no power otherwise? Well, we can turn to satire and ridicule. That's the weapon of the downtrodden. Satire, ridicule.
How dare you use satire and ridicule?
Yeah.
I see what you did, Matt.
That's what the powerful hate, ridicule, satire. I just made a fake satirical Facebook event, saying like UQ Confucius Institute discussion panel, why the Uyghurs must be exterminated. And, the satirical jab there being the Confucius Institute is literally an arm of the same government that is perpetrating this genocide. So, it's not even like that beyond the realm of possibility that they'd have this discussion panel, discussing the merits of this genocide.
There is a Confucius Institute at University of Queensland?
Yes, and back in July during that first protest, we actually occupied it, and like we protested like really heavily against it. I guess that was one of our main sort of like criticisms of the university's relationship with the Chinese government. We've got a Confucius Institute here. Our vice chancellor was once on the organization that oversees Confucius Institutes worldwide. He was actually given an award by a Chinese vice premier in 2015 for his efforts promoting Confucius Institutes worldwide. And this is an arm of the Chinese state, and our Confucius Institute has literally funded. So the Chinese government through the Confucius Institute has funded 4 UQ courses. And, why do they fund UQ courses? They're not doing it out of like charity, they do it so that these courses, present a very glossy picture of the Chinese government's human rights record. And like one of these courses presents the detention of 1.5 million Uighur Muslims in concentration camps as a justified response that is like, legal, like a justified legal anti-terror response. They're like framing it in the Chinese government's language that like Uyghurs are terrorists. And this is being taught at, UQ, which is probably considered like one of the best universities in Australia. UQ students were being taught like the detention of 1.5 million Uighur Muslims was like a justified anti-terror legal response by the Chinese government.
Off the top of your head, do you have emails for like the vice chancellor of Queensland University?
Yes, I do. Let me grab that up, and you can everyone in this podcast can maybe send them a few emails and just ask about what's happening.
I would never suggest that people listening do this.
If we accidentally show it
Hang
on the screen.
if right now. No, please don't email that.
It would be so bad if like, the hundreds of thousands of people who watch this YouTube video email vc@uq.edu.au. That would be so bad. Don't do it.
If people got upset by hearing the story. I mean, but I don't know. Would people listening be upset by the idea that China is able to undermine the democracy of even a university with money, let alone Australia and America?
Well, yeah, let alone the actual governments. Government of a
I'm about to rage quit, Shelley. I'm barely keeping it in right now.
Yeah, it's infuriating, isn't it?
So what about the Brisbane government? Like, do they have any like say in this?
Well, the federal government, does have a say, I suppose. And that's, like the recourse we have. So, the first Senate meeting of the year, I was the only, UQ senator to sort of like vote against the reapproval of the Confucius Institute. They passed this agreement without like every single UQ senator, because they're all, just corporate stacks, I suppose, that support the vice chancellor. They all voted for the vice chancellor's new agreement with the Confucius Institute. I was the only one to vote against it. And then after, like at the Senate dinner, the vice chancellor, Peter Hoy, he came up to me and he's got like this Danish accent, super villain accent. And he's like, "Oh, well done on your activism, Drew. We just reapproved the Confucius Institute." And then he all just like laughed, and they all laughed, and all these old corporate ghouls just like laughed and mocked me. I was just like, wait 5 years. You'll see that I was right.
They belong in the cuck pen.
Yeah.
And yeah, he got what you posted about it recently, like $200,000.
Yeah.
What was it specifically? I can't remember off the top of my head.
So, this was revealed on the floor of the Australian Senate under parliamentary privilege, and a whistleblower at the university basically revealed that Peter Hoy, the Vice Chancellor, was afforded a $200,000 bonus last year. And one of the KPIs he was judged against when it came to that bonus was like deepening the university's ties with China, deepening the university's ties with the party state.
And that's the Vice Chancellor whose email is this.
Yeah, vc@uq.edu.au. It would be really bad if everyone emailed him.
Yeah, very bad.
Geez. So you're saying that his bonus was partially judged on how well he fostered those ties with the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, and it noted that he had visited China 4 times in 2018 and 2 times in 2019 and met with the party officials there and stuff like that.
I wonder who paid for those trips. I bet it wasn't him.
And what do you do when you visit China as a vice chancellor? You're meeting with party officials, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, as part of, he was directly financially compensated for, deepening ties and cultivating ties with the Chinese party state, the Chinese Communist Party.
Is the University of Queensland funded partly by the Australian government?
Yeah, it's a public university.
Okay. So as a public university, it's getting funding from both the Chinese state and the Australian taxpayers.
Yes. Yeah.
But their priorities in terms of how they behave is pretty clear, I think.
Yeah. It's basically, look, they know they're over a barrel when it comes to the Chinese government. They rely on the Chinese government for probably up to about $300 million a year in student fees from China. And, if the Chinese Communist Party, which is a totalitarian state, says tomorrow, this campus is too politically sensitive to allow Chinese students to study at because there are all these pro-Hong Kong protests, tomorrow, the Chinese state can say no more students from China are allowed to study at UQ, and UQ would be insolvent overnight. So what do they have to do? They have to make sure that they're constantly, licking the boots of Chinese party state officials.
It's also like if the Chinese Communist Party were to do that, it totally disrupts the education of 9,000 completely innocent students from China.
Yeah.
Who are they're just there to get their degree, and suddenly they're have to leave the university, or you know what I mean?
They're given patriotism tests, right?
Yeah.
If the Chinese Consulate General is praising the patriotic students who went and beat up the Hong Kong protesters, that sends a message about what makes a patriotic student, Chinese student at, UQ, and what you have to do.
Exactly.
Right.
And there have been cases of Chinese police going to visit Chinese students' parents
Yes.
in China if they had showed any kind of support for Hong Kong.
Yes.
Though the Chinese students there must be terrified.
The Chinese students there are terrified. So we've got the Chinese Student Scholar Association on our campus, and that's they boast on their website that they're an arm of the consulate, that they've basically liaise with the consulate. And what does that mean? They've got basically spies to ensure that Chinese students there continue their patriotic, love of the motherland and stuff like that. I've been on campus. I've just been walking by myself off to the food court, getting a snack for lunch or whatever. A couple times, a Chinese student has come up to me and they're like, I know about Tiananmen. I really love what you're doing. I really support you completely. But I can't be seen to even stop and I can't be seen to stop and see you. I can't be seen to stop and talk to you because, there are Chinese Student Scholar Association people around, and they monitor your political loyalty.
That's got to be incredibly motivating for you.
Well, yeah, I when that happens, so I've been the target of such fierce and vicious, Chinese propaganda where it says I'm this racist anti-China hater, I'm a xenophobic sort of guy. When an actual Chinese student comes up to me and says I support what you're doing, it means a lot, because fundamentally, I'm on their side. I want them to be able to study at the University of Queensland. I don't want Chinese students to be kicked off campus. I want Chinese students to be able to study at UQ and be exposed to democratic values, be able to speak freely, openly, without fearing for their families back home. That's what I want. I care about, I care about the livelihoods of Chinese Australian students. I recently organized, a hamper drive on campus that, organized free hampers to like students in need. And like we delivered like hundreds of free hampers to, Chinese international students. I care about Chinese international students. I want them to be able to live like peacefully in Australia. I want them to be able to like live securely. I want them to not have to fear for their families back home. I want them to like be safe. I care about Chinese international students.
So the University of Queensland has been trying to silence you, even threatening to expel you.
Yeah.
The result is international media picked up on your story.
Yeah.
What's been the response throughout Australia about what's been going on?
Yeah. So I guess going back to that, like the satirical Uyghur event, I guess what happened was like UQ sent Clayton Utz, which is like I guess one of Australia's most like prestigious law firms or whatever. They sent a partner at Clayton Utz to send me a letter, basically threatening a lawsuit to seek indemnity costs for prejudicing the university's reputation unless I immediately deleted the event. And, like this is a $1 billion organization threatening like a 20-year-old undergraduate student with a lawsuit. They know I can't afford it. So it was an attempt to, exploit the power imbalance between us. I deleted the event, but, that wasn't enough for them. So they've now compiled this 186-page expulsion dossier filled with all these like spurious allegations against me. The core ones are still still relate to my political activism. So the core allegations relate to that satirical Uyghur event I made. Basically saying I prejudiced the university's reputation by implying that the Confucius Institute and the university, because of their ties with the Chinese government, supported the Uyghur genocide, which they literally do,
You're like, but it's true.
I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
the
it's
best
literally
defense
true,
is truth, right?
Well, it's true. If you cultivate ties to the Chinese government at this point in history, when you know that there are 1.5 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps, in the largest internment of a people based on their ethnicity since the Holocaust, then the blood is on your hands.
But is it wrong to sell out human rights for money? A lot of money.
Oh, true. You're right. That's a good point.
I mean, $300 million, like...
I mean, imagine what you could do with that.
Yeah, imagine how many more people you could persecute with that money.
And the 200K bonus, it probably allowed Peter Hoy to buy like a really nice BMW. So to be fair, it's like...
And that supports the global economy, which is really suffering because of the coronavirus that came from the United States.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Like, who cares if your hands are just drenched in blood? Like, as long as...
They're also filled with money.
Hey, if that BMW is red, you won't even notice.
Of course. So there's the Uyghur genocide thing, the satire event I made, which is not even satire because the Confucius Institute is an arm of the Chinese state that is persecuting the Uyghur people. And there's also the fact that they also brought up again my post where I was like, as a UQ senator, I support Hong Kong, saying that prejudiced the university's reputation, and a Chinese student withdrew from their non-award study with the university because, like, I guess they had a shit and piss that I was an elected representative of students supporting Hong Kong. Some people have sooks because they get really offended when someone, criticizes police brutality and like police, shooting kids in the head. Really, let's think about the student who withdrew. Really unfortunate for him. He couldn't really take, I guess, criticism of wrapped a police squad to like basically shoot like 10-year-olds in the face. Sorry, you can take that part out. That was a bit too much.
We're really going to have to bleep this more than any other interview we've done.
Well, we'll come up with a good sound. Yeah, so I'm furious.
Yeah.
People in Australia must have been furious as well.
Yeah, well...
Like, there has to have been like some kind of blowback against the university.
Yeah, well, there have been 30,000 signatures on the petition against my expulsion. It's been like, daily news in Australian newspapers, like the Daily Broadsheet, The Australian, which is, I guess, like the most circulated national paper. Like they're basically carrying stories every day on it, basically. Clive Hamilton wrote like this very like furious op-ed basically exposing it as just like this absolute politically motivated farce. Probably 5 or 6, like there have probably been about 6 or 7, elected members of parliament, senators who have spoken out publicly in my favour. Senator James Patterson mentioned my plight on the floor of the Australian Senate. There's been tremendous backlash. but I guess the university sort of just felt like, we know there'll be backlash with this case, but just if we do a cold, hard, brutal economic calculation, like the reputational damage we take as a hit because we're trying to expel a student for leading pro-Hong Kong protests, that reputational damage we take will not be as costly as the Chinese government, I guess, like turning off the tap on Chinese students for the next 10 years, which would cost the university billions of dollars.
What kind of strikes me about this whole snowballing situation is that it was kind of self-inflicted on the part of the university.
Yeah.
Like, if they hadn't tried to silence the student protesters so hard and tried to go after you so hard, a lot of this stuff about how cozy they were with the Confucius Institutes or the vice chancellor's bonus and these things would not have come out. Is that correct?
Yes. I actually emailed. So when the Australian, ran an editorial like last Thursday, like this was the editorial opinion of the Australian, like the biggest national paper in Australia, basically like condemning the university's like attempt to like expel me as like politically motivated sham. I emailed, I sent an email off to the vice chancellor and the chancellor of the university. And I basically said, like, please pick up the Australian newspaper this morning. And also, here's a link to the Wikipedia that explains the Streisand effect, which is basically, which is basically like when you try and shut down information, it just blows up.
Wait, why is that the Streisand effect?
It had something to do with Barbara Streisand.
Well, what happened was like in 2002 or something like that, Barbara Streisand tried to like suppress. It
was like a photo of her house, right?
Yeah, it was like there was like this sort of like photographer who was taking like aerial shots of the California coastline, and like she tried to suppress like a photo where her house was like kind of like in the background, and there were like 4, and like this photo had only had like 4 views on like the guy's website at the time, and then like once she tried to do this lawsuit, and tried to like kind of like get the photographer to take it down at the threat of a lawsuit, like I think the photo then had like 600,000 views like overnight, and like you can find it anywhere on the internet today. So it's basically like the Streisand effect is basically.
Right. Well, what also happened with the photo is that because it was in a lawsuit, it then became part of the public record.
Yeah.
So that everyone could then use the photo, and it couldn't be suppressed anymore.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what the University of Queensland has done. They've Barbara Streisand it.
I don't really get how the vice chancellor is paid $1.2 million a year and given this $200,000 bonus when he's actually not very smart. Like I'm 20 years old, he's 63. I'm 1/3 his age, and I just run rings around him really easily. It's pretty crazy. Like,
yeah, but they got the Confucius Institute passed. You did. You couldn't stop that.
Oh yes, true. Well, what happened the next day after I publicly tweeted like, this is the vice chancellor. He basically publicly mocked me. Oh, look, we just reapproved the Confucius Institute. Well done, Drew. I publicly tweeted that. A couple elected senators who follow me on Twitter saw it. 2 days later, they announced a government task force into Confucius Institutes nationwide. So, how do they not get they keep on losing every time they try and do this to me? I don't know.
I mean, that's also what the Chinese Communist Party does. Every time it tries to crack down, it just digs a hole for itself.
Yeah, the Winnie the Pooh stuff. These people are very, very insecure. They're not. It's not the sign of a very confident world power.
They're not very big brain.
Yeah, it's not a sign of a confident world power that they have to employ legions of censors to take down Winnie the Pooh imagery on Chinese social media, and then they have to actually publish in Chinese state media. Drew Pavlou is an enemy of the state. Some 20-year-old poster at UQ in Queensland, Australia. They literally have to condemn him as an enemy of the state. This is a nuclear armed superpower. I'm a 20-year-old poster.
I have to say, Drew, it took us 7 years to get recognized by Chinese state-run media as being anti-China, and you managed to do it in a week. So, yeah. Congratulations.
What are we not doing?
I actually want to ask, Drew, you're drawing a lot of fire for your activism. Yeah. Have any of the other students who have been doing these protests, or have they had consequences because of what they've done?
Well, I guess the university's attempt to sort of so I guess the attempt to expel me, I think, is to a large extent, attempt to like silence people. It's like a signal, like it's a signal to try and send like a chilling effect to people. Like this is what happens when you criticize the Chinese Communist Party on campuses across Australia. And I've had a lot of like a lot of Hong Kong students have said this to me, and also a lot of Australian students have said this to me. They're like, we really support what you're doing. I want to be involved in the protest, but I can't because, I don't know like what the university will do to me if I'm like seen to be like, part of these protests. So, it has its that's what they want. It has its intended effect. They are able to, they are able to silence a lot of people with these types of threats. It just doesn't work with me because I guess I'm crazy, but like for a lot of people, sadly it does work.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have any family in China they can threaten.
Well, that's
I'm
very lucky that I don't have that I don't have family in China that they can threaten, because I remember talking to a Uyghur student like in Sydney, and this Uyghur student was like, "Hey, I wanted to organize a Uyghur rally at my university. I've been like, but like after I started reposting some of your stuff, like my mother back home in like Xinjiang was, like paid a visit by like the Chinese police officers in her village, and they basically said, make sure your son doesn't take part in any of the protest activities in Australia at the moment, or there might be problems."
Wow.
Jeez.
And I've had Uyghur friends in Brisbane who've been called up in the middle of the night by Chinese police officers, and the Chinese police officers have their mother in the room, and it's over Skype, and they're like, "Hey, we've got 4 or 5 police officers here with your mother. If you don't want anything to happen to her, it would be good if you like give us your car registration details or your number plate. Give us details about where you study in Brisbane, where you work in Brisbane, where your wife studies and works in Brisbane, where your 4-year-old daughter goes to preschool in Brisbane." It's sickening. It's terrifying. These are terror tactics to silence and intimidate people.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
These
but
are
I
terror
mean,
tactics.
like they provide so much money to the University of Queensland, though.
Well, it's not just University of Queensland. This is happening in a lot of universities in Australia.
It's almost all. So we've got like, I guess, this group of 8 alliance of universities, and I guess those are like sort of supposed to be like the way they like to call it themselves. They like to pretend that they're like the Ivy League of Australia, but really they're just like, I guess, like the CCP's like stooges. Like they're really just like, Xi Jinping's like nanny boys in Australia. And I guess these guys, like, every group of 8 Australian university like is in the exact same position as UQ. And that's why a lot of vice chancellors across Australia support Peter Hoy, our vice chancellor, because they're in the exact same position and they don't want to be put in that exact same position.
What about the Australian government? I know there's been an ongoing case, particularly brought up by Clive Hamilton, about the kind of influence the Chinese Communist Party has on the Australian government.
Yeah, sadly, I guess, like, so I guess we're quite similar to America in that we've got like a pretty entrenched 2-party system here too, where you guys have the Republicans and Democrats. We've got, I guess, the Labor Party on the left and the sort of like Liberals/coalition on the right. And, over time, the Chinese Communist Party has worked assiduously to sort of, I guess, infiltrate both parties, and both major parties in Australia like have had elected representatives, like, I guess, like be embroiled in sort of corruption scandals. The Liberals have an MP called Gladys Liu, and she was on like, the committees and boards of like United Front organizations, and those are the organizations the Chinese Communist Party uses to sort of, I guess, like monitor and mobilize, I guess, Chinese Australians in their favor. And then the Labor Party had Sam Dastyari, who developed really close ties with these Chinese billionaire donors, and as a result of these ties, suddenly started like undermining the party's stated opposition to China's actions in the South China Sea. And overnight, he just started saying like, well, maybe Australia has no interest in like patrolling the South China Sea. Maybe like we should be like not taking sides against China and stuff like that. Like like both major parties have had like, elected representatives be embroiled in these sort of corruption scandals linked to the Chinese Communist Party. And as a result, like it's very, very difficult for both major parties to take strong stands criticizing the Chinese Communist Party. Look, our government at the moment is quite critical of the Chinese Communist Party, but it's difficult, like, because I guess it's almost as though there's like a civil war within this sort of Australian elite. Like there's sort of like the pro-business side. There's probably like the side to like the Australian elite that like loves the money that flows in from China, because like Australia does a lot of business with China through trade, and then there's also like a part of the Australian elite that's very resistant to that. And I guess it's like this sort of like intra-elite civil war. And like the sort of pro-China business side, like they make it really, really difficult for our government to like take any, strong actions against the Chinese government. Like a couple years ago, I remember, so this was like research done by Clive Hamilton. I remember a couple years ago, like in response to the Australian government, I guess, like openly criticizing Chinese human rights abuses, the Chinese government, I guess, like just held up like Australian wine shipments to China, like basically just like held them up at customs. And what was the response of like the heads of like, like the Australian wine industry? They weren't like, oh, stand strong, like this is, Australia's prerogative to have an independent foreign policy where we're able to criticize the Chinese government's human rights abuses. No, like, the heads of this like Australian business lobby were desperately begging the Australian government, back down, please, 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 let us get wine caskets out. They just care about money before everything else. It's sick.
And they're trying the same tactics now. As the Australian government is kind of pushing for an investigation into the origins of the coronavirus, China has cut off beef imports from Australia.
Yeah. Exactly. Like the Chinese ambassador gave an interview where he basically like gave this implicit threat: if the Australian government continues with these calls for an independent investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, or like Chinese consumers just might not like to do business with Australians anymore. They might not want to buy Australian beef or drink Australian wine and that sort of thing. And it was like one of those implicit, Godfather type threats again. Like, it'd be a shame if something happened to your exports or something like that. And then like there was like a huge furor, and then like the stooges of the Chinese Communist Party in Australia, then they also tried to defend the ambassador. Oh no, he's not. It's not a threat. In fact, he was just talking about like the interests of Chinese citizens back home. Maybe they independently will launch consumer boycotts. It's not a threat by the Chinese government. He's talking about like the, I guess, barometer of Chinese public opinion. And then 2 days later, the Chinese government just literally stopped like meat exports. Like they just like followed up on the threat. Like this is how this government operates. They use economic coercion to get their way. And that's why I basically support, a full boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, because, we shouldn't be doing business with a government that firstly, like is involved in these egregious mass human rights abuses, like basically, operating concentration camps on a scale unseen since the Holocaust. And two, like, we should be standing up for our democratic values. We believe in free speech, we believe in democracy, we believe in the rule of law, and we shouldn't sell that out just for business profit. Like our values have to come before money always.
Hey, after you graduate, have you given any thoughts to getting involved in politics?
Look, it's a dream one day, because I feel very passionate about like human rights activism. I want to devote my entire life to it. And so like, yeah, like I want to spend like I want to put all my energy towards this sort of activism and fighting for these sorts of like, fighting for justice, fighting against like, like political oppression and stuff. So like one day, hopefully I can like get into parliament and stuff like that. It is a dream.
So Drew, what's going to happen now with your expulsion hearing?
Yeah. So, there's the 186-page expulsion dossier, and before the public pressure really stepped up last week, they were actually like sort of refusing to allow me like legal representation at my hearing. And then there was a lot of public pressure, and a Queen's Counsel barrister like offered to like represent me pro bono, Tony Morris QC. And I guess for American viewers who don't know what a QC is, like a silk is basically like one of like the top lawyers in the country. So like I'm prepared to, like fight this tooth and nail legally. And I think that first sort of expulsion hearing, which will occur on May 20, I think it's basically, I believe it's going to be a kangaroo court. Like they've probably got their own like predetermined outcome. I don't believe they would have compiled this 186-page dossier, like that focuses on my political activism, but also just like adds in all this like extra superfluous just bull. Like, oh, Drew used a pen in a campus store without paying and then put it back on the shelf. Like they just, it's indicated.
Is that actually one of the things in the accusation, is that you used a pen and didn't pay for it before? Like,
yeah, ridiculously, that is literally a part of the allegations outlining the case for my expulsion. And what that's sort of...
I got to apologize to everyone listening. I didn't expect we had this kind of a monster on the show.
Yeah, it's a war crime, mate. I should be up in The Hague before like the war crimes tribunals.
Which China would also not listen to. Now, you mentioned there was like a petition about your expulsion. Like if, I don't know, if somebody listening wanted to sign a petition, where would they go?
So it's a change.org petition. Maybe you can put it in, I don't know, maybe you could put it in the bio of the YouTube video or something like that in the description.
Right next to the Vice Chancellor's email?
Yeah, right next to the Vice Chancellor's email. And yeah, and there's like a petition now, and it's got like about 30,000 signatures at the time that we're doing this interview, and that's pretty significant. But yeah, unfortunately, I think it is kind of like a kangaroo court. Like, I don't think like it's going to be a fair trial. I think what that sort of thing, like, they include like the pen in there. Why do they do that? They throw everything but the book at you. A couple months ago, Peter Hoy and the Vice Chancellor, Peter Hoy, the Vice Chancellor, would have sat down with the management committee, said, like, look, this guy's a problem for us because he threatens our long-term business ties with China. Like authorize, the disciplinary committee to do an investigation. They could go through his social media. Just the student charter is written in really broad terms. So, like fit anything that could possibly like be considered a breach of the student charter under like, fit that into it, make sure like there's this huge case that he can't answer, like make it like 100, like make it 200 pages, make it this huge thing. That's what they would have done a couple months ago. Like, and it would have cost them tens of thousands of dollars to prepare this document and legal fees. So, like if we're thinking this is going to be a fair trial, like when I finally go up against the UQ internal disciplinary board, like we're kidding ourselves. Like they've already made the decision Drew's going to be expelled. So we're already looking forward to like the appeals and things like that. And I'm just going to fight it tooth and nail. We'll go to like, we put in our submissions to UQ in our defense, like, we're reserving the right to appeal this eventually to the Supreme Court of Queensland. We're ready to fight this tooth and nail legally. I'm not going to be going anywhere. This is my house, the Wolf of Wall Street sort of thing. Like they're going to need a wrecking ball to get me out of here. So like, I'm not going anywhere. It's my university.
You are the real queen of Queensland.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, gosh, really best of luck to you. I think everything you're doing is incredible. We'll follow your story and definitely post a link to that change.org petition, and we'll post that email that I wouldn't recommend anyone actually send an email to.
Of course not.
That'd be bad. I wouldn't suggest that.
We're definitely not suggesting it.
We're definitely not.
Yeah,
if the lawyers of the University of Queensland are listening.
Yes.
We said to not do it.
Don't do
Make
it.
sure you don't email Vice Chancellor Peter Hoy at vc@uq.edu.au. Yeah.
It's important to respect people's privacy.
Of course, as they've respected mine, basically following me around campus for like 9 months. The other day I walked onto campus and, like a security car just follows me. Every time I go on campus, they've just got like security teams shadowing me. It's epic. It's so funny.
Well, I mean, now that you can't go to China, they're bringing that to you.
Yeah, I know. Well, honestly, I'm just happy because I want to make sure that I waste as many of their resources as possible. So, they've spent tens of thousands of dollars on this attempt to expel me. They're spending thousands of dollars on the security teams that follow me around campus whenever I go on class. That's great. Waste as many of their resources as possible. Waste their time, waste their money, waste their energy, because ultimately I'm not going to be expelled. I'm going to be like justified. And I just want to like, Paul Keating, the Prime Minister of Australia, he once had this like famous quote in Parliament. like the leader of the opposition sort of like asked, like, why aren't you going to call the early election? Like, you're going to lose. And Paul Keating got up there and he just was like, because, mate, I want to do you slowly. And that's how I sort of feel when it comes to UQ. Let them waste the money. Let them waste their resources. Let them waste so much time trying to expel me because I'm going to do them slowly. And I'm going to be fine in the end. They're not going to be able to touch me.
I see why they hate you.
Well, put them in the cup bin.
I want them to hate me because I hate them. I want them to know I hate them. These corporate ghouls who will sell out anything for money.
Well, I'm sure they're watching and will now know that you hate them.
I feel like this is going to be like the 187th page in the expulsion document now.
Yes. Well, we've got to be angry about these people, you know? They're selling out democratic values, doing deals with this genocidal government, all for money.
Yeah, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, best of luck.
Oh, yeah. Where can people follow your story?
Oh, yes. Cool. So you can follow me at Twitter at Drew Pavlou, DREWPAVLOU. And yeah, I'm also on Facebook, Drew Pavlou, DREWPAVLOU, and Instagram the same. Yeah, follow me on social media so you can keep up to date with the fight. And like, you know, I appreciate all this support, and I want to hopefully like, you know, try like organize like a movement against this sort of thing in Australia, but also internationally, because, you know, we need to be fighting for democratic values. We need to be fighting against this genocidal government.
Amen.
Yeah.
All right. Take care of yourself.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
I just wanted to rage quit that entire time. I was so mad.
At the University of Queensland?
Well, not at Drew.
Yeah, no, it's shocking. You know what I hope the Australian government in Canberra does is, you know, come up with something along the lines of, you know, a public university can't get Australian government funding if they're also getting, you know, this kind of funding from the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, it just shows that like it seems like the Australian taxpayer money is more than the Chinese money, but they're just so confident that that money will never be taken from them, that they're more concerned about making sure they keep the Chinese money.
So, I mean, but ultimately it does come down to money, right? Because if they weren't getting money from China, then there's no way they would ever like try to expel a student for expressing his political views. Like, that's nuts.
It's like the opposite of what universities are supposed to do.
Yeah, I think also the whole thing is the potential threat of not getting the money. Like, if they weren't getting a lot of money, if you're not getting a lot of money yet, what's held out to you is the potential of getting a lot of money. Do you know what I mean?
Schrodinger's bribe.
What?
No.
That didn't work.
It's both alive and dead at the same time? And you won't know until you look at it?
Isn't there something about an observed? I don't know. Anyways.
Okay.
But the point is, yeah, like they don't even have to be getting money. They just have to have like the promise of potentially maybe getting money. And so many people will give in to that.
Yeah, I mean, they are getting a lot of money, though.
Yeah, I mean.
I was wondering, this whole coronavirus thing is a huge hit to universities that are getting money from international students, Chinese international students.
Who knows? Maybe they'll realize they can live without it.
I mean, what did universities around the world do before like 1990?
Paid their staff a lot less.
No, I think actually a lot of this money isn't going into paying their staff. It's going into things like expanding the university.
Don't you think like the top levels are getting a lot of money, bigger and bigger paychecks?
Possibly, but I think a lot of it is going into things like, look at what NYU is doing, right?
Duh, my alma mater.
Like NYU in Shanghai.
Yeah.
NYU in Abu Dhabi.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't things that are happening because students are like, I really want to study in Abu Dhabi. So there's a lot of money in both those places, you know. So like these schools are, you know, instead of having large endowments, they're just raking in the cash from having these international students who don't have scholarships or anything. So they're going to pay the full tuition price, which has skyrocketed, you know, in the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, look, the Australian government can do something about this if they want. But the question is,
the U.S. government did something last year where they did say that, like, if you want to have a U.S. government-funded language program at your university, you cannot also have a Confucius Institute, and that did lead to some universities getting rid of their Confucius Institutes.
Yeah, no, that was a great start to it, I think.
I mean, it really requires a broader public knowledge about what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. And when the public of the United States and Australia says this is unacceptable, that's when things really will change.
That's when the politicians will change. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think in that case, the University of Queensland is doing a great job of publicizing.
How bad it is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even more reason people should like and subscribe to the China Unscripted podcast.
I like how you looked at us like, see?
See, that's how
That was
YouTube is
smooth.
done.
Yeah.
For those of you watching on YouTube, which if you want to watch us on YouTube, we have a video. Otherwise, enjoy us, the smooth sounds of our voices on Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes.
And ChinaUnscripted.com.
Is it .com?
Yes.
All right, we'll just cut that a little bit out. So once again, thanks for watching / listening. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
Talk to you next time.